All right, good evening to those of you on the East Coast. Good evening also to those of you on the West Coast. Welcome to Uncanny X Chronicles, the unofficial X-Men 97 podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Troy, co-creator of Movers and Shakers Unlimited, as well as your host. And thank you for joining me these past couple of weeks. As you will know, with this podcast, we're going to try to each week give you a breakdown or analysis of that said episode and then share some of my theories. And I say our theories because each week I will also be joined by a special guest co-host who will also be sharing their thoughts on that said episode. And when we wrap it up towards the end, we'll also give our final verdict, if you will. So without further ado, let's get into this recap of episode 5, titled Weapon X Lies and DVDs, as it does something unexpected in that it doesn't tackle the ramifications of the major death that took place at the end of episode 4, that, of course, spoiler alert, being Magneto, and it instead diverts away from it to explore a subplot introduced in the end credit scene. So let me explain. Wolverine is in pursuit of Dr. Cornelius and his latest experimental ambitions, or so he says. More on that later. However, instead of going on his mission with his expected allies, the X-Men, he surprisingly does so with his fellow Team Xers, Kane, Maverick, Lady Deathstrike, and Sabretooth. However, one X-Men does go along for the mission, his BFF, Morph. So upon arriving at Cornelius's secret facility, one thing soon becomes clear as the team encounters nearby mutated wildlife who not only take down their vessel, but also exhibit strangely aggressive behavior towards them once on foot to Cornelius's compound. Even stranger, instead of bleeding red blood, their blood actually bleeds green. However, as the team journeys deeper into the compound, and of course, after seeing scores of bodies later in that pursuit of finding Cornelius, they finally do find him, and he himself reveals what is afoot. He encounters a member of the Brood, or should say, he encountered a member of the Brood and began experimenting for its military applications. But as one might expect, things went awry, and the Brood have successfully infected the inhabitants at the compound, human and animal alike. Now Wolverine, Morph, along with the members of Team X, have to figure out a way out of the compound before it's too late. However, as chaos continues, it soon becomes clear that Wolverine wasn't necessarily forthcoming in his reasons for pursuing Cornelius. And this is revealed thanks to him being located by Team X in the adamantium chamber, in their pursuit to figure out a way out of the compound. It comes to be revealed that he didn't track down Cornelius to stop him in his experiments. He tracked him down to get his adamantium skeleton back. Lucky for him, that gold becomes the one thing, I should say, that is able to save him, as he's soon later infected by the Brood. But as is the case, they are successful. He eventually does cure himself of the Brood DNA that has infected him once he reacquires his adamantium skeletons, since the Brood DNA is affected by adamantium. However, all of what transpires in the episode does not come without a loss. Of course, we do have a couple of Team Xers that bite the bullet, whether we're talking about Kane or Maverick. But it also provides a casualty of sorts to the friendship between Morph and Wolverine, as Morph likely will never blindly trust his best friend again. So with that, I want to be able to introduce the said co-host that we have this week. A good friend of mine, is a jack of all trades, if you will, in terms of what he brings to the table, not only as a photographer, but also as a fellow journalist as well. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show because he has been on here before, Mr. Kaede Kendall. Kaede, what's going on, sir?
Howdy, folks.
So, quite an episode that we have. I do have some thoughts on how it played out and the choice to have this episode. But you being our guest co-host for this week, I love to get your initial impressions before we do so.
I mean, in general, X-Men 97 has been a very fun experiment as far as rebooting the original Fox animated series and
Sure.
updating the animation and being
Yes.
able to sort of cater to an older audience just because they know that this is mostly for the fans who grew up watching the original Fox cartoon, myself included. So,
Yes.
especially with this episode, you get to see a little bit more violence and brutality than you would have gotten in the original cartoon just because broadcast practice and standards being what they were.
Yes.
You definitely get to see something that's closer to what you would have seen in the comics where okay, people are going to get killed and they're going to get killed violently. It's
Yes.
not a situation where they have to kind of dance around that. So I think that is something that is a plus for this episode. um in general, I liked the episode, but at the same time, I had serious issues with it, especially with the characterization of Wolverine. And, you know, obviously there's a lot to Wolverine as a character as far as the comics are concerned. And I feel like in the context of the series, in terms of the original X-Men, the animated series, and X-Men 97, this felt a little out of character for me.
For
It
Wolverine, you're saying?
Yeah, it felt like even with the flaws in the character as they're presented throughout both versions of the animated series, it seems very odd to have a situation where Wolverine says, "All right, let me get this information from Captain America. Let me put together this team. I'm going to be, it's basically a Predator situation. Like he is the Carl Weathers character in the scenario."
So let me pause you right there. Do not forget that comparison that you made because I want to be able to dig further into that. But um, I also agree. I find it funny because I feel like it's pretty serendipitous that I have you here on the show because I feel like this is the most horror esque episode that we've had thus far. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's violence that we've had in other episodes, but in terms of the slant that they go. Speaking of our fellow Yautja, right? It's very Xeno-esque this episode, and I feel like I mean when we're talking about the Brood anyway, I do enjoy those antagonists because they fall in line very much in that same slant of being like xenomorphs. So
But having
it's
glowing
always
green blood like the Yautja.
yeah, I mean, it's always fun when they pop up, but like you, I do have my issues not only with the characterizations of Wolverine, but with other characters too, based on what has been established in the continuity of this series. Forget the continuity that you have with the comic books. I'm just saying within the continuity of this series, since this is basically continuing those adventures of what has already come before, everything that has happened in that 90s episode, what, 30 plus years ago, is still canon to this show. It's
Yeah.
just as if they just basically did put on a pause button and now 30 years later we're continuing those said stories with everything that they've already established as continuity. So with that in mind, I feel like that they did a disservice to certain characters. And here's the thing too, like all this time I've always sang the praises of 97 for its ability to be able to dive into a lot of plot, and yet despite all the major plot points that they get into, they manage to figure out a way to do it succinctly, um within the confines of the limitations that they have of only doing what 8 or 9 episodes versus what 20 some episodes that you would have back in the day.
Well, I
So
mean, even the original um X-Men animated series. I think each season was only like 13 episodes.
You know what? You are right about that, but I guess just thinking of what you would have in terms of the standard fare with a lot of animated shows.
Yeah.
Now that you bring that up, that it was rarefied in that sense of it still being relatively short compared to other shows. But I guess what I would say is, even if it is only a 13 episode season, the fact that they get through so much plot and so much story arc from comic runs, that has been, a sight to behold in terms of them being able to do that. Because I feel like even within 13 episodes, I feel like they would have stretched more of certain story arcs and not kind of fast played through a lot of it. And I'm saying, to their credit, it's still it feels like seamless. It doesn't feel like we're like rushing through things. It still
Are
feels
you
like,
saying that about the original X-Men series or X-Men 97?
I'm
Because
saying with 97, with some of the episodes that we had, you may feel differently. So I'm curious how you feel, because I like I said, we get into like Goblin, like the first season, we get into like Goblin Queen, we get into Madeline Pryor, and I feel like that could have been you can spend a
oh,
whole season on that.
they needed that was the thing that, looking back on the first season of X-Men 97, I wrote about this, but it was just a situation where, okay, you're dealing with a lot of different major plot points that you're just cramming into these first 10 episodes of the first season, where you've
Yeah,
got Life Death, you've got Inferno, you've got Fatal Attractions. All of these should have not necessarily taken up an entire season, but at
but a
least
majority of it, it's
like a
enough
third or
there
a
to
half
chew
to
on. Yeah, it's enough to
because
chew
you
on there.
because you just think of, especially Inferno and the whole Madeline Pryor reveal, that went from her figuring out, she discovering she's a clone, her turning evil, her deciding that, to her being, convinced to be good again by the real Jean Grey, and then having to send her and Scott's baby into the future. That all happened in one episode,
Yeah, yeah,
and none of it gets to breathe. And even though we see Madeline in, I guess, two more episodes, because episode 5 was the one where she was on Genosha, and she was one of the casualties of that whole mess. So to have that, and then especially with Life Death, when they're doing, trying to have this story where Storm is dealing with the loss of her powers. And I feel like even in terms of the comics, that was only a couple of issues anyway. I don't think that was like an long, expansive storyline even in the comics, but the way they have it structured in that first season, where first of all, it starts as the second half of an episode, where the first half of it is just a side quest for Jubilee and Sunspot to be in in the Mojo universe, and
right.
also a great opportunity to have the original Jubilee voice actress Allison Court be a different character that Jubilee encounters, or a different version of her. So that was a nice little passing the torch moment. But then you have like the second half of that episode be the start of Life Death, and by the time you do the next episode where she gets her powers back and everything, that felt so rushed. And again, for all the talk of fans talking about how much this show is, doing Storm justice in light of how she was handled in the live action films, and the same with Cyclops, where I'm
Yeah,
just like, no, she gets a few moments here and there where, yeah, you get to see how powerful she is, and especially in this season where she uses her powers to create a goddamn solar flare. Yes,
right. Yeah,
it's awesome, but there's still not nearly enough to actually say that, oh, we're really fleshing out this character. So when we have the end of episode 4, which sees um Magneto stupidly trying to get Apocalypse or Ensamanur to see Charles's point of view as far as where mutants should be headed, especially considering the fact that there's no sort of epilogue to how things ended or how things were near the end of the first season, where Magneto said, fuck it, Charles's way of thinking isn't working. I'm going back to what I was doing. Mm-hmm. And they didn't touch on the aftermath of that at all in this new season. And when we cut to them, he's now thinking to himself, well, and I guess time has passed because he grew a beard and whatnot, but it's one of the things that I don't like as far as there being like
the ramifications, the consequences.
There being some significant development that should have happened to get us to Magneto thinking that way, that he could convince Ensign Manure to be someone more in line with Charles's way of thinking without addressing in the context of any episodes of the series.
Because he did rip out the adamantium not that long ago out of Wolverine, and then they got sucked into the past.
And then they get sucked into the past. So and MCU live action movies do this all the time, and that's another story. But to have that happen where, okay, we need to kind of like sit with certain things. So Wolverine losing his adamantium, there is no development as far as his frame
powers,
of thinking.
His powers,
how his emotions or feelings about not having his adamantium. So it doesn't feel earned, basically.
The whole subplot of him, his evolution going, into secondary evolution, and which I just feel like maybe they just didn't want to get into the weeds, so to speak, the weeds in the grass of trying to tackle that whole other character of him, quote unquote, actually being a stronger character. Once he gets rid of the adamantium and his mutation progressing further, like Sabretooth.
Yeah, and that's the thing, because there's nothing presented in any of these episodes to get us to this point where, realistically, if you're going to do this episode, you need to have at least 2 or 3 preceding episodes that didn't have to be exclusively about Wolverine and his situation from not having the adamantium, but you had to do more than the season premiere where he's in the future with Scott and Jean.
I hear you.
Because again, that's the Scott. Yeah, because again, that season premiere for season 2 of 97 is laser focused on Scott, Jean, and Nathan.
Yeah.
So to go from and that's the problem with the show overall, that it's just they've fragmented it so much as far as different teams being in different times and having to have X-Force episode in between where they're going off against X Factor, which was a great episode.
That was a great episode. I was about to say that was a great episode. But go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
But you're doing it at the expense of trying to have these moments with these characters where you're supposed to feel the weight of what happens, and there isn't any. There isn't any weight to Wolverine convincing his old Team X members to go with him on this mission and be completely underhanded about why they're carrying out this mission, to the point to where 2 of those members end up dying. One of them right off the break. And to be fair,
how they
wrote
Garrison right off the break.
And to be fair, how they wrote Garrison Kane at the beginning of this episode boiled my piss, because I was like, this dialogue is terrible. He feels, for whatever development he has in the comics, there is none of that there. So I was kind of happy that he died. But we've seen Maverick before, and you kind of get the impression that throughout the episode, this is a great character. We're happy to be
formidable, but the way that they kind of unceremoniously, I get you. I understand where you're coming from, and I get all of that stuff. So, I mean, I'll just say this: considering the day and age that we live in now, where a lot of serialized TV, or if you want to say streaming, has to is far more concise and is not it does not go into a lot of filler. There's a catch 22 with that, right? You have filler episodes that give you the luxury, or I should say, you have shows that have a certain number of episodes, and a lot of them, some of them can be considered filler, where you like, why did we have that episode? And then you have other episodes where you're like, wow, I'm grateful that I had that, because it allows us to dive deeper into this character's motivation and things like that. So it's kind of a catch 22, because you get additional episodes that are not necessary, but you also get episodes that help you in that regard, versus what you have now, where we have episodes that they cut away a lot of the fat, and for better or for worse, you may have instances where it's not perfectly flawless, but they're able to get their point across. And there's some elements where, if we really think about, had they really dived into it and gotten into the weeds of a lot of those things, it could have gotten off course. Like, I'll give you an example, right? When we're talking about Goblin Queen and Madeline Pryor, you have all these other elements, like with the, like, the henchmen, and all of her like different creatures and all those things. And we got some, if memory serves, we got some of that, but I feel like they would have gotten lost in some of those elements had they dived deeper into that character in the run and the stretch of plot that they utilize with her character. Um, but I agree with the other things that you said, though, in that there are instances where, which actually gets into the issues that I had with this episode, where you have something that happened before that doesn't necessarily connect to what they're doing now. And if it's supposed to be the same continuity, and if it's supposed to be the same thing, then why isn't that the case? But with that in mind, I want to get into the analysis of the episode itself. You teased it a little bit just a moment ago, but I wanted to, get into it further. Is just the idea, which we see in a lot of stories, especially when it comes to superheroes, of what them feeling like they're losing the thing that makes them special or unique. And I love to get your thoughts on it. I mean, we've had it in the past with other medium forms of media. Yeah, a good example of that would be like Iron Man 3, where, you know, Tony Stark has all his quote unquote toys taken away from him, and he has to kind of like rough it and figure out a way to still win the day without having all of his toys, so to speak, and him realizing that he's Iron Man, and the fact that he has a suit doesn't make him Iron Man. Tony Stark is Iron Man because of what he brings to the table. Similar
Yes,
thing we have.
the
Go ahead.
best. Yes, the best Ducktales MacGyver mashed up we didn't know we needed.
Right, right. So, I mean, in getting into this episode that we have with Logan, we have a similar thing going on here, where he seems to only feel like he is of value by having the adamantium skeleton. It feels like that's what makes him him, versus the fact that he's uh uh has an incredible mutation, the fact to be able to what is it, regenerate, and
Yeah,
to have these heightened senses that allow you to track people and all these other things. So, like, when you really get into the details, you're like, dude, what's your issue? Like, you're awesome, but to himself, he feels like the only thing that allows him, or makes him feel like he brings something to the table, is the adamantium. So, I'm curious to know your thoughts on that, and them tackling that in this episode.
yeah. I don't think they handled it particularly well. I think
Mm.
it's a situation where, again, we're not talking about the comics. We're only
Right.
looking at it from a standpoint of the original animated series and then this new version of X-Men 97, where
Right.
we've had so many episodes where we look at Wolverine as a character, especially like the one where he was like in the Arctic and he was with the Inuit tribe, and just you see so many instances, especially why I feel like Worf was the completely wrong character to have as the second X-Men to be on the team for this mission, where more than likely that should have been Nightcrawler.
Yeah, as the morality.
Yeah,
I agree.
because as much as you want to make Morph a more fleshed out character, I understand that, but at the same
He's kind
time,
of duplicitous.
it's not even about him being duplicitous. It's just a matter of there are other there should be other opportunities where you want to explore that with Morph versus something where, especially when you look at the introduction of Nightcrawler in the original series, that was a big two-hander between him and Wolverine, to the point where Logan had no real, not necessarily disbelief in God or faith or anything like that. But by the end of that episode, he was reading the Bible and trying to like find peace. And that's something that you always see with Wolverine, is for all his ferocity, for all of his berserker rage, he's
Yeah,
always a character looking to find peace within himself.
right.
And to have this episode have him be this character that, you know, is sort of being underhanded in his motivations with the people around him felt very off. And that was one of the things that really sort of soured me on the episode overall.
Got you, got you. And I mean, I get where you're coming from with that, because I feel like so oftentimes people enjoy the anti-hero aspect of a lot of characters, especially in the case of Wolverine. But when it really comes down to it, when push comes to when push comes to shove, like, he does the right thing. Like, he is an honorable person. So it it really does feel weird in an example like this that he would do something kind of just like I was saying with Morph, kind of duplicitous like this. But I would say this. I would say I don't I don't necessarily disagree with his actions, because I can understand that maybe he's more willing to sacrifice Team X than he is to sacrifice the X-Men. My point is, or say my thought is, if you were going to do that, I feel like you wouldn't have kept Morph in the dark about it, because I feel like Morph would have gone along with it even if he knew what the true intentions were, because like that, Wolverine is his guy, like that's his dude. So like I feel like the fact that he kept Morph out of what those intentions were, those true intentions were, is what makes it weird to me, because I feel like he would make some questionable decisions, but I feel like his rationale in that circumstance is the fact that, oh well, I'm doing it with this black ops team. Like, we do, do devious, crazy things all the time, and they don't really bat an eye at, some of the things that we've done in prior missions. So this isn't that big of a deal. So I feel like he's made the rationalization for himself. I think the really telling thing that I feel wouldn't be a thing that Wolverine would do is not telling Morph what his true intentions were. I feel like he would have had him in on it with him.
Okay, that's fair.
Um, but with considering that of what you're talking about, and talking about just the idea of continuity, the thing that got to me, and then now this is getting out of analysis part, is we've already established that he's a part of this black ops team, and that they have a history with Sabretooth and with Maverick and Lady Deathstrike. And if memory serves, because this is kind of, I hate to say, a remix of what they did in the original run, and it even has a similar title to the episode.
Yeah.
Is that they didn't leave off on good terms. Like they kind of disbanded. They did their mission and they disbanded, but they weren't like, buddy buddy. They weren't. They left off on still kind of frosty terms. So I feel like what they needed was something that established how he was able. I don't feel like just saying that we're going to get Cornelius would have been enough. We needed to physically see something between them interaction wise where he got them on board, because just to have them just pop up and say, "Hey, we're going on this mission," based off of
Especially
how.
with Sabretooth.
Right, because they have such an antagonistic relationship. Even though they've been on this Team X together, they are always at odds. And to have them like kind of joking with each other, and then him joking with Morph and all of that seemed out of place.
Yeah.
Unless you really establish how they got to that point where they were able to put aside even Deathstrike. Yeah, Lady Deathstrike, she didn't leave on the best of terms with Wolverine, even after the last time that they interacted with each other. So it was hard for me to believe that, they got into a point where they're, willing to work together as a team again. So that
Yeah.
that was something that was really odd to me. And then the fact that there were instances where they saved each other, like, Sabretooth saving Wolverine at one point, and even Lady Deathstrike saving Morph at one point. Like, she's someone who, she will, based off of what we see him again, based off of what they've established thus far, she's really ruthless. And I wouldn't buy that she would be willing to put her neck out for a character who up to this point she's never known. Like, Morph just
Yeah.
brought her off for the ride, and she doesn't really have an established relationship with him. So that part was weird. Um, and I'll take it a step further. While I love this episode, and I should say, I won't say love, but I like the choice of antagonists. I like the Brood. The Brood are awesome, but there's a certain way that you have to utilize the Brood, and in terms of trying to making a decision of how you're going to map out your season, it seems really out of place to have this quote unquote side quest when you have something as major as a major character's death. Like, I feel like this should have been plugged in later on in the season, after we've already dealt, talking about what you were saying, the ramifications of having Magneto die.
Yeah.
Like, to have that happen and then just to pop in, oh well, this episode, we're gonna jump into a side quest versus dealing with the ramifications of that. I feel like this episode should have been the ramifications of that. And then if you wanted to do a side quest, yeah, then we would have license to hop into this story with Wolverine and Team X. So that's another thing. The decision to make of where they place this episode seem out of place.
Yeah.
But considering all those things, do you have any theories that they've kind of like maybe planted the seeds for in this episode that you feel may come back later, in other episodes?
Full disclosure, I barely give it that much thought.
Okay.
Like more often than not, like at least in terms of this show, I honestly haven't particularly cared.
Okay.
And it and it's funny because you watch any other show, and especially ones where they have the overarching narrative, and that's the whole thing. Like, you think about, okay, what is this going to lead to? What is the mystery? And here, in terms of X-Men 97 in general, I don't get much from it. Obviously, there's going to be more with Apocalypse, but
Yeah.
it like when you make all of these side quest episodes, like front loading them in the first season, where all right, we've got the first season where the X-Men are in the future and they're dealing with Nathan and trying to decide whether or not to for Cyclops to tell him that he's his father and all that, and then we cut to Cable putting together X Force and recruiting Jubilee and Sunspot, going up against X Factor, just in the wake of the X-Men being lost in time and whatnot. and then going back to have a two-parter where we deal with the other team of X-Men in the past and Apocalypse before he becomes Apocalypse and getting that whole origin. It, like, for as much as everyone kind of wants to praise this show and take it as like the greatest
Gospel.
piece of the greatest piece of media that Marvel Studios has put out, or Marvel Television has put out. I'm just watching it and just thinking to myself, this show is clunky as all hell. As fun as it is to watch, as fun as it is to think back of when you were a kid watching the original show, and in retrospect, the original was clunky as hell too.
It
That
was
there were so many instances of characters who like were
popped up
introduced who were
and
introduced
never came back.
not even popped up and never came back. They were introduced and the X-Men would look at them as if they never met them before, and then there'd be a flashback episode. Like, perfect example, Rogue meeting Pyro in the present day as far as the original X-Men, and it's like then 2 seasons later you have Rogue's origin where she's on a team with Pyro um, when she got her powers from Miss Marvel,
Right.
or none of the X-Men knowing Warren Worthington, but before he became Archangel, and then having a flashback to the original 5 X-Men with Warren Worthington as Angel included. So it was just a lot of different instances like that that happened in that show, and in that version of the show, in the original version. And then now it's just a situation where we're trying to do too much at once with a less of an amount of episodes as they did per season in the original Fox version. And I get the sense that a lot of that has to do with them being aware of the nature of streaming and aware of the fact that, in general, streaming has this whole ecosystem where we're just producing far more content than we used to 30 years ago.
And that attention span, so you have to make it more concise.
So you have to make it more concise. So you just have this glut of fan service moments throughout a truncated season that clearly works for most of the audience of this show and most of the people who are actually like critics of it. They don't care. They're just happy to have that feeling of watching the original Saturday morning cartoon. That matters more to them than the actual like flow of the story and the
Yeah.
whole structure of everything, where you're just thinking to yourself, some of this just is not clicking together as much as y'all think it is. And it's tough to watch the show, and I feel like that's part of the reason why I'm so disconnected from the idea of having any type of theories about what's going to happen in other episodes. I do think that Danger is supposed to appear in like either the next episode or the one after that, which, again, because we see that they're also like having the X-Men in the Grant Morrison costume, like in the Frank Quitely Grant Morrison costumes from the new X-Men run, and I don't know where that's going. But again, those are big ideas that you're trying to have multiple ones in this one season.
Right.
And it's not, for me anyway, it's not resulting in anything that feels very cohesive. Although I will say it would be great if whoever ends up voicing Danger turns out to be Cree Summer. Which, number one, just that would, even remove from the fact that her father voiced Sabretooth in the original cartoon,
Yeah.
that would be my number one pick, because they've been very hush hush about who's voicing Danger.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I feel like there are a lot of things that are on the horizon. I feel like when I've talked about this on prior episodes, is that Onslaught seems to be on the horizon of now what has transpired between Apocalypse and Magneto and Professor Xavier. They've pretty much, I feel like set up everything they needed to set up to establish that. which is fun because I feel like up to this point they did a pseudo version of that in the original 90s show where they kind of did it but didn't really do it, where they had like an evil Professor Xavier but he didn't really become Onslaught. Like, do you remember that episode where like he had like, I think he left his body and went into like the astral plane or something, and he was able to stand. He wasn't in his wheelchair. They had him like with a cape or something. I feel like he had like a cape or something. Like they had him as
Yeah,
like an alter ego or something. And I was like, oh,
something.
okay, you guys are kind of doing Onslaught, but you're not doing Onslaught.
Yeah, and
So
that's the thing that one, yeah, I should be excited about as a fan who remembers how big of a deal Onslaught was, and the way that was they treated that like a whole like ongoing horror movie, and it was like a mystery and a horror movie at the same time. It's arguably one of my favorite runs of the X-Men since I had started reading the comics. But seeing how the show has sort of treated some of these big moments from the comics and how they either don't mesh well with one another or they just kind of gloss over like a lot of important stuff that should be happening on like the prologue or epilogue of those stories. I'm not sure how, like for me anyway, I don't trust them to stick the landing. Like plain and simple. Like I remember when they introduced Bastion in the first season, and I just thought to
such a cool
myself,
character.
such
And I wish
a
I
cool
wish it,
character that they did like all sorts of kitchen sink bullshit with, that most of it did not work. And then by the time you're having that with the aftermath of the Genosha massacre and trying to do those things at the same time, it just all smashed together into like a mess. It was basically, you know what it felt like? It felt like a child taking multiple colors of Play-Doh and just smushing them together.
That's fair. That's fair. Like I said, I completely understand, where you're coming from. Um, I'm just giving a pass based off the circumstances and the climate that we live now with the type of serialized storytelling that we have, where you can't place everything in the story, and if you're going to place it in the story, at least give us enough of the story where it doesn't feel like there's anything that's unnecessary. I don't mind things being kind of streamlined based off of, and this is just just me personally dealing with a lot of anime and watching anime growing up. I've had instances of that where I'm like, we literally spent a whole episode just with characters talking, like literally with them standing feet from each other, and that was the whole episode. And I'm not going to name any names, Dragon Ball Z. Um, don't get me wrong, I love that show. I love that series. That's why I'm so passionate about it, and why I feel like you should be able to have your issues or your criticisms of it. If we're thinking of, and I'm going to do a super quick deep dive on Dragon Ball Z, of the different sagas that you have what your Saiyan saga, you have your Frieza saga, you have your Buu saga. The Saiyan saga, not so much, but for sure in the Frieza saga, there were entire episodes dedicated to the characters not throwing one punch, and they literally talk to each other the whole episode about how powerful they are. And I'm like, will you guys fight?
Yeah, that's why I could not Ball Z, because when that would happen, they would power up their super move
Right,
for
and that would be the whole episode. For the whole
when they
episode,
and then
powering
when they finally let that joint off, they'd miss. I'd be like, "Fuck, man, fuck this show."
So maybe after experiencing what it could look like when there are a lot of filler episodes with some shows that I've watched, and that I don't get me wrong, I'm making these points and I'm criticizing it, but I still love these shows. Is having experienced the other side of it, I now don't mind when you have shows that cut away a lot of the fat. And sometimes I know that that can be to the disservice because there are instances where you wish maybe they might have spent a little more time on something. But the other caveat to that is if they're spending a little time on this, who's to say that they won't spend a little time on something that's not necessary? So
But the other thing you have to consider is the fact that in the original X-Men that was on Fox, what
yeah,
they would do was they would cut away from like what the main episode was
they would,
momentarily
they
to
would,
to have other characters that were doing their own thing. Like the whole time when like the second season where Xavier and Magneto are on the Savage Land. They
yeah,
just would cut
and I
away
love
for like
that.
2
Yeah,
to 3 minutes every episode so that you could see that story play out in the background.
yeah.
That's what they did. They did that on a
The main plot in
cartoon on a
your
cartoon
secondary plot. Yeah,
where yeah, you would have a main plot and a secondary plot every episode. And those were episodes that were, when you factor in commercials, probably about 20 to 22 minutes.
yeah.
Whereas this one is no commercials. They can run for like a solid half hour and they're not doing that. That's a big problem for me. Where
Okay.
you have more time, you don't have commercials anymore, and you're having an issue of trying to tell multiple stories, and they're doing it so inefficiently where they say, all right, we had this major moment happen at the end of this episode, now we got to cut away to something else for a whole episode. That's the problem I'm having.
So I got you. So being able to balance it within one episode versus trying to just dedicate the episode to a singular plot. So that way, when you are diverting away from the main story, it feels it it, it takes you out of it from, I guess, from what you're saying versus them seamlessly trying to intermingle those stories in the same episode.
Yeah, like people are, gassing this up because, you know, yes, the animation's better, which is going to
Oh my
happen
god,
over
yeah, it is. Like this
which
episode particularly was incredible, like the animation. But
but
yeah,
I mean,
sorry,
yes,
continue.
that's going to happen, when it's been 30 years since the last show where everyone's going back to the original X-Men and being like, "Man, the animation was so trash back then." I was like, "Okay, it was 92. What the fuck do you want?"
But
It
here's the
wasn't
thing:
it
when we
wasn't
were
it wasn't
watching it, then we thought it was awesome. We like this animation is incredible. This is awesome. So
and it, and,
it's
it,
all
and
relative.
it wasn't even an issue of like, "Oh, this animation is awesome," because no, we understood that we were watching that for the story. And it was just fun to watch. Like you don't have the same mindset as a child to sort of over scrutinize certain things. And yeah, for 92, that was pretty good. Yes, you
Pretty
also
good.
have the fact that on the flip side of that, you did have Batman the animated series that still holds up today.
Still
But
does. Yeah.
to be fair, you have to imagine that Warner Brothers was probably putting up a lot more money to make sure that animation was on point.
Yeah. 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 No, I get you on that. So
And even when you look at the first attempt at making the X-Men series, Pride of the X-Men, which was like back in 88,
yeah,
89.
yep. I've seen
Um
it. Yeah,
yeah,
it's something. It's
it,
something.
it's it's something, but like even by 88, 89 standards, that still looked pretty decent.
At that time, yeah,
At
for
that time
sure.
it looked pretty decent. So I feel like that's one thing that's kind of
And you
throwing
have the
people
anime
off.
style X-Men. People, I feel like don't talk about that one. Where I mean, that one was interesting too. Well, with what they did with that anime style
Oh,
X-Men. Yeah,
that when G4 was doing like the anime Marvel shows like that, Blade, Iron Man. Yeah,
yeah,
that was a fun experiment. And yeah, I had a lot of fun with the with the anime X-Men show that they did for G4. I thought that turned out very well actually.
yeah. So, Well, I feel like that's a great segue in getting into your verdict. If we're thinking of the number of X's telling us what you thought of the episode, with five being a great episode, four being good, three being average, where would you place episode five?
It's between a 2.5 to 3 for me.
Okay, all right. And I mean, you have shared all your gripes, so like it makes yeah, I get it. And I would say equally, um it's a three for me, even though we're both horror guys, we both love horror films and horror content. And while I appreciated seeing the return of the Brood, because it's always fun when they pop up and show up, because of what they're akin to. Like I said, they're akin to like xenomorphs that you have in other media. Um, Still, despite that, I feel like this was improperly placed in the season. I feel like it would have gone over a lot better had it been placed somewhere else. And then also, I do agree with you in terms of characterization that we have with the characters that exist here. If we're utilizing the same continuity of the 90s show, we needed something there to bridge the gap as to how he was able to convince his Team X members, fellow co-members, to join him on this mission.
Yeah.
Simply to have them say that they're trying to take out Cornelius, I still see other characters saying, "Okay, go f yourself. We even if you're doing that, I don't care. I don't want to be a part of it. I'm not joining you. Like, do what you want to do. I don't care, but I'm not joining the mission." And I can see that happen with some of the characters. I can see that happening with Deathstrike. I can see that happening with Sabretooth. And so that seems kind of out of place. And then also to what you shared about Wolverine, I don't feel like he would have left Morph out of what his true intentions were. Maybe if you had another character in there, like to your point, you mentioned Nightcrawler, that would make sense that he would keep that from Nightcrawler because he is, very morally far different than Wolverine in terms of, sometimes doing things that fall within the gray. With him being a religious character, I feel like that would have been interesting to have him in there to kind of act as like a moral compass of Wolverine kind of acting in the gray there. Maybe, the other characters might not have died, or maybe they would not have been left behind had Nightcrawler been involved in that. And that would have made an interesting dynamic with them of him kind of being his moral compass and allowing him not to be a quote unquote monster that they keep saying that he is. Lady Deathstrike said at one point in the episode, "Oh, that's what Wolverine does. That's his thing." When she was talking to Morph, you're acting like you're shocked of his decision to do certain things, but that's what we've known him as. We know him as somebody who's cold-blooded and ruthless like that. But be that as it may, considering the type of rapport and friendship that he has with Morph, and what we've seen from Morph in the past in how he's been portrayed, he's a character that can be duplicitous and can act in the gray and behave in the gray. So I don't feel like he would have kept Morph in the dark about what he was doing. So that is something that's odd. So I definitely would, while I enjoyed the animation, like I said, was incredible. I always enjoy the Brood popping up, but considering characterization and uh, the decision of where they place this episode, I would definitely have to place it as 3 X's out of 5 versus what I had in prior episodes. Any additional thoughts before we wrap up here?
Nah. I know and I'm sure there are a lot of people that are just gonna be like, "Oh, you're just being a hater. You're just being contrarian."
No, like, I get it.
No,
I get
no.
it, and I appreciate it too. I appreciate having contrast and idea.
Yeah, because at a certain point where you see people talk about this show on such a level, especially in light of the whole controversy with the removal of Bo DeMayo and like the prospect of future seasons and being in sort of these, nerd spaces where they're just already convinced that the show is going to be terrible after this season. and there's no chance whatsoever that the quality that they've come to expect from the show, which again, I'm looking at it from a standpoint of no, some of the stuff that you're doing in this show, you're doing too much and not having it come together as well as y'all think it is. But it makes me also question what will you do for subsequent seasons? Will you hold back on this idea that you just have to take as many different, like, disparate plot lines from the comics and try to all smush them into one season? Because you're doing Days of Future Past, you're doing Rise of Apocalypse. If we're to be believed, then you're doing Onslaught. These are big things that, yes, they've all been X-Men stories, but I don't think the show has done a particularly good job of making them work in conjunction with one another within the context of an episodic TV show.
No, I
Like
hear you. I hear you.
just
I
like
would
just
still
to
say this. I would still say this though, considering the ambition that was involved in doing opening this season with 3 episodes, I feel like they did a pretty solid job, all things considered. If you're comparing it elsewhere with, maybe X-Men Apocalypse, and I know that's not a high bar, right? But still, to be able to have those 3 things happen and still make it feel like, at least in my opinion, it felt like we were just basically watching like a 90-minute X-Men movie. Mind you, it being animated, where you have these 3, like you said, disparate teams, and they're functioning in different parts of time, whether it's the past, the present, and the future, and they're having things that kind of come to a head together, and how you have a lot of things that are parallels to each other. You have the talk of Apocalypse, and where he stood in terms of his level of power, in a certain time. You have these different X-Men teams that are all led by a Summers, and how that comes to be based on how they operate. Some are kind of ruthless, some are kind of cookie cutter in terms of following the government, and then you have others that kind of act more within what they feel is best, and kind of working within the balance of feeling what's maybe more morally right versus what is right within the context of what you would have with the government, and there's sometimes policies that may conflict with that. So I was able to appreciate what they were able to do with that. And man, let me tell you, like, if I had on my bingo card of having an X Force intro, that made my day of having an X Force intro. I'm not gonna lie, that was pretty cool.
I
So
know all the fans really loved that. Yes.
I love how detached you are. Yes, all the fans, not myself, but all the fans. Um,
No, it was cool, and I think that was a good episode, especially for
for
how much they
Jubilee,
did with Jubilee. I get it,
yeah.
but again,
Because I
I feel
feel like they kind of give her the shaft all the time, and kind of make her like a damsel that has to be saved oftentimes, like from various villains, and to be able to show that she can be formidable, I appreciate it a lot. Because up to this point, I feel like, and minus maybe what you have in the comics, I'm saying in terms of like animation and live action, she's very much kind of gotten the short end of the stick, in my
hmm,
opinion.
okay, yeah.
So, but that's going to do it for us here at Uncanny X Chronicles, the unofficial X-Men 97 podcast. I want to thank my co-hosts this week, Mr. Kaede Kendall. Kaede, can you tell folks where they can find you?
You can find me primarily on Blue Sky. That would be Ken K 1980. If you want to find me there, and have your pitchforks and torches at me,
Right.
you know. Um, but I also have my own YouTube channel, which is at Random with Ken K. So hopefully I can get back into the swing of putting out a few more videos for y'all. And I also have the Instagram for that, which is randomly Ken K. So those are the places where you can find me.
Excellent. And of course, guys, you can find me at Brandon Troy. Well, you can find me at Movers Shakers Unlimited, and we are on all the socials, so Facebook, X, Instagram. But you can find me at Brandon Troy ENT on X, and then what you see down below, the IG Brandon Troy _ENT on Instagram. We had an interesting time doing this episode because we were actually going to do it later, if y'all remember, but we decided we were able to, move it up to this time because we're dealing with different time zones. If you guys are not aware, I'm here in location for San Diego Comic-Con. So I'm already here getting prepared for Comic-Con week. So it should be fun. There will be some other opportunities with some other shows that we do here. And talking about what are some updates that they're having with those said shows. Of course, we will still do This Week in Pop Culture, which will be happening tomorrow, and breaking down what happened in the past said week, and probably teasing San Diego Comic-Con to follow. We also have our live watch of House of the Dragon that we will also be doing tomorrow as well. But be on the lookout for some SDCC stuff, as there should be some things coming down the pike. And I'll try to do my best to keep you in the loop for that. So thank you guys so much for watching. Be safe out there, and see you guys soon.